3rd century after Neoplatonist Soticus wrote an epic poem based on Plato's account of Atlantis. Plato's work may already have inspired parodic imitations. However, lordship expounds the Atlantean wisdom that is to redeem the earth. Its three parts consist of a first narrative of the life and training of an Atlantean wise one, followed by his utopian moral teachings, and then a psychic drama set in modern times in which also